My God.
You're late.
Ooh, man.
Having trouble getting from the kitchen to the den?
Oh no, from the last Zoom call. You know, it's so crazy. I was on another call. I was just trying to get off.
You don't know how to do 2 Zoom calls at the same time?
No, I don't know. Can you do that?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I can testify to that.
Oh man, that was close.
Hi, Alderman.
So I will ask anyone who is on the panel, please go ahead and share your video so people can see who you are. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're trying to keep everyone muted until you need to speak, just so that we can sort of avoid some of those background noises and disruptions during the presentation.
Okay, and Nolan, we are recording and now broadcasting on YouTube.
Okay, should we go ahead and get started then?
I think so.
All right. So without further ado, I want to first and foremost, on behalf of myself and the panelists, thank all of you for taking the time tonight. Welcome you to the Woodlawn Community webinar, and thank you for taking the time to register, to submit questions in advance, and to be here and participate in what are some really trying times. My name is Nolan Zaroff. I am a planner with the Department of Planning and Development at the City of Chicago. And before we sort of get into the real content here tonight, I want to take a moment to just provide an overview of the agenda for the evening for this webinar, what we hope to accomplish. We're going to go through some sort of a welcome and introductions, give the panelists an opportunity to greet you and say a few words. We'll then get into sort of a more formal presentation to provide you an update on the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report, as well as an update on the Woodlawn Affordable Housing Preservation Ordinance. As you know, when you registered for this webinar, you had the opportunity to submit a question in advance. And so we'll take about 30 minutes after the presentation to go through those pre-submitted questions. So I will read those off to the panelists and give them an opportunity to answer those. And then we're also hoping to do, for the last 30 minutes or so of the webinar, an open Q&A. And so throughout the presentation tonight, throughout the webinar, at any time, if you have a question, you have a comment, please feel free to submit those through the Q&A function. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a button that says Q&A. If you click on that button, you are able to type something in there, type in a question, type in a comment. You can do that at any time. We would ask you, when you do that, to please include your name and whether you are a Woodlawn resident or not. And we have city staff who will be recording those, or collecting those, recording them, and then we'll do about 30 minutes where we will read those questions off and have the panelists answer those. So, so there won't be an opportunity for anyone to sort of speak tonight, but you can submit questions and comments through that Q&A function, and we will do our best to get through all of those questions in the time that we have tonight. So that's sort of the plan for this evening. I want to introduce and welcome our panelists. We have several people on the webinar tonight who will be able to answer questions for you from the Department of Planning and Development. We have Commissioner Maurice Cox. We have Lisa Washington, a coordinating planner who is the lead planner for the Southeast region of the city, which includes Woodlawn. Myself, from the Department of Housing, we have Commissioner Marisa Novara. We also have Managing Deputy Commissioner Anthony Simpkins. And then from the 20th Ward, we have Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor with us. And from the 5th Ward, we have Alderman Leslie Hairston. So I want to give the alderman an opportunity to sort of greet everyone and say a few introductory words. Alderwoman Hairston, did you want to say anything before we get started? And make sure, if you may be muted, make sure to unmute yourself.
I was talking to myself. Good evening, everybody. And I had such a wonderful introduction. You know, I want to say thank you all. It is very important to us
Right.
that we hear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That we continue to engage you as we move along. And I know that we have been doing this for more than a year. And so I want to thank you all for your commitment, for showing up to all of the many meetings that we've had, giving your input, you know, but the work really is just beginning because we've got a long way to go to make this happen. But I just want to thank you all and welcome you.
Great, thank you. I don't know if Alderwoman Taylor is there.
I'm here.
Oh, great. I see
For
the
some
background. I
reason-
don't see you.
Yeah, I don't. Okay, hold on. There I go. Okay.
Hey.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for being willing during this time to participate in this call. Alderwoman Harrison said it best. We've been doing this for about a year. So thank you for your commitment and your willingness to always come to the table, and then know this process does not move without you all. And so this conversation is important, and it's something that we need to hash and have out. And so I'm excited about hearing from you all in the work that we're going to do to transform the community into a space that we all can love and enjoy.
Thank you. Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Navarra, I don't know if you want to say a few words too before we get going.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Again, thanks everyone for hitting pause and taking the time to focus really on the future of Woodlawn. I think this, for better or for worse, is our new normal. And so we are going to get really practiced in how to continue a dialogue with residents about the future of their neighborhood. So your participation is vitally important as the work moves forward. And I hope that this will serve as a kind of refresher to the work that you've done over the many, many months as we kind of begin to try to go from planning into action. So I look forward to the conversation tonight. And I'll pass it to Commissioner Navarra.
Thanks, Commissioner. I too am looking forward to this. We've taken a bit of a pause with everything that we've been needing to address with COVID-19. So it's great to be back in this conversation. And I do welcome the chance to really marry our efforts here. The Department of Planning and the Department of Housing have had at times happening at the same time, different conversations, and it's been important to us, and this is why we had a joint open house at the end of January to really bring these conversations together, particularly tonight as we're talking about a consolidated plan. We definitely heard from people that they wanted more detail on affordable housing and the plans there for the community. So very glad to be having a coordinated conversation tonight. Thank you.
Great. So with that, let's get into the content. I think we wanted to provide everyone an update on the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report, and then I'll turn it over to Anthony Simpkins to talk through some of the affordable housing strategies that Department of Housing has been working on. But for us, it's really important to talk about why a consolidation report. Why did we do this effort in the first place? And the idea is, for Woodlawn, since the year 2000, we've seen more than a dozen plans and studies developed for this neighborhood. Some of those were developed by the city of Chicago. The vast majority of them were developed by community organizations, by nonprofits on the ground, by neighborhood groups. And so it really, they underscore, how many people and organizations care about Woodlawn and its future success, but they also underscore the need for, one path forward. And so the idea is, how can we work together? How can we develop sort of one strategy, one framework that incorporates all of the ideas that have been brought forth in these past plans and studies, but how do we put those into one document that sort of guides our efforts and moves us forward? And so that's really what the plan consolidation report is. And it's also important to talk about what it is and what it is not. What it is an acknowledgement of what the community says it needs through these 12 or 14 plans and studies that have been developed. What it is not is the city deciding what is important. It's also one path forward as opposed to multiple independent paths, right? So it's looking at how do we coordinate. It's a guiding document, and that's really important to underscore. This plan provides guidance, it provides a framework, but it's also a living document. It can evolve, it can change over time as needs and priorities change. It's not set in stone, and taking it to Plan Commission does not set it in stone. So, and then finally, and maybe most important, this really is the beginning of a process, the beginning of a conversation. It's not the end of a conversation. So, so this just is kind of, indicative of, or sort of an example of some of the different plans and studies that have been created for Woodlawn over the past 20 years. These are not all of them, but many of them. And it's important to recognize that along with the community engagement that went into these past plans and studies, we've also, the Department of Planning and Development and the Department of Housing have also undertaken a series of community outreach efforts and engagement efforts over the last several years. So, we sort of start with the basis of, what the community says in these past plans and studies, but we've also augmented that with, meetings with the Network of Woodlawn and their One Woodlawn subcommittee meetings in 2018 and 2019. The Department of Housing held a series of working groups around affordable housing issues in October, between October and February last year to this year. Both TPD and DOH have targeted focus groups in December. We also had a Woodlawn Open House at Hyde Park Academy High School on January 30th that was attended by more than 200 people. And the Department of Planning and Development, and I believe the Department of Housing also attended the Woodlawn Community Summit on March 7th that was attended by more than 400 people. So, so we really have had, several touch points over the last, really 18 months, to talk through ideas and make sure that, we're on the right path in terms of what are these priorities from past plans and studies, which ones move forward. And so all of that information, the analysis from these past plans and studies, the community engagement efforts and what we've heard back from residents and business owners and stakeholders in Woodlawn, all kind of come together in this Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report, which summarizes what are those important things that past plans and studies agree on that need to be implemented or moved forward. And then we try to identify what can the city and its partners do in coordination with the community to move some of these ideas forward. And these are sort of the 7 recommendations. I'm not going to read through these right now because I'll go into them in greater detail later on in the presentation. But there really are sort of 7 ideas that the city has identified. Not that these are new ideas, but these are tools or methods by which we can try to achieve some of those goals that past plans and studies have identified. And so what are the goals that past plans and studies have identified? There are really 9 kind of overarching or higher level goals that were articulated across a number of past plans and studies. These are the 3 that relate to housing. So a lot of the past plans and studies talk about the importance of supporting existing residents and addressing displacement concerns. They talk about expanding housing choice, including affordable housing and homeownership opportunities to support a range of income levels in the neighborhood. And then they talk about really encouraging the reinvestment in existing housing stock. So Woodlawn has a great stock of historic homes and 3 flats and duplexes, and how do we reinvest in those to make sure that there's quality housing available for the residents of Woodlawn. When we talk about commercial goals that past plans have identified, they really focus on expanding local ownership and neighborhood retail in the neighborhood, redeveloping vacant lots and buildings, particularly along 63rd Street, and then reestablishing 63rd as a neighborhood center, making sure that 63rd is a dense and vibrant corridor where people can shop and dine and find entertainment options, and also live with mixed-use development along that corridor. And then looking at the public realm, past plans and studies talk about the importance of improving the pedestrian conditions, improving those conditions of the public realm, so making sure that sidewalks are comfortable and wide and there are amenities along the sidewalks that make it comfortable for people to walk and enjoy Woodlawn. Improving internal and external links, which really means, how do we connect Woodlawn with itself and also with the neighborhoods surrounding it in terms of pedestrian amenities, bicycle amenities, and other types of connections. And then addressing real and perceived safety concerns. It's important that people, residents and visitors, are able to spend time in Woodlawn, enjoy Woodlawn and its many amenities, and feel safe while doing so. And so that gets us to the report recommendations. And these are really, again, they're ways of achieving the goals and the vision that past plans and studies have set forth. And so the first recommendation that we talk about in the report is targeting greater density along 63rd Street and around CTA stations and the metro station. Again, to really kind of revitalize and liven up 63rd Street so that it is that neighborhood center, that place that people can go and spend time and shop and eat. Visioning for future density with the community east of the metro tracks along Stony Island Avenue and at former Chicago public school sites. The report recommends preserving the existing character of neighborhoods by developing vacant residential city-owned lots similar to existing zoning. The report also recommends addressing concerns around displacement by making sure that we're integrating affordable housing goals into the recommendations, into any development scenarios or strategies that we pursue, and making sure that those affordable housing goals have been developed with community input. The report recommends targeting and coordinating city resources to support local business development. And it also recommends identifying open space opportunities, particularly in the southwest corner of Woodlawn, that's sort of the farthest away from existing public open space like Jackson Park and Washington Park. And then finally, working with the Chicago Department of Transportation to scope for potential streetscape improvements, particularly along 63rd Street and other commercial corridors, again, to really make these corridors feel safe and comfortable for people to spend time and to patronize businesses and encourage new businesses to establish themselves there. And so that gets us to implementation. How do we go from these 9 goals that have been identified in past plans and studies by the community and take them through these 7 recommendations and then actually take action on them and make, and move them forward and achieve these recommendations. And first and foremost, and most importantly, is continuing to engage with the community throughout the process in a meaningful and consistent way to make sure that the residents' needs and concerns are addressed and incorporated into our recommendations, into our implementation, to make sure that what is achieved in Woodlawn really reflects the goals and the needs of the community. One of the tools we hope to pursue to achieve some of these goals is to develop a zoning overlay district for Woodlawn to really clarify and organize zoning for developers and investors in a way that meets the neighborhood's vision, so that development is occurring in a way that reflects what the community wants and needs. That zoning overlay district would help to guide the form of development with resident and stakeholder input to create a vibrant community. And it would also honor Woodlawn's existing character while allowing for new ideas to enhance the neighborhood. So, it's not about, developing a lot of, all sort of faux historic housing stuff, but how can we incorporate and integrate contemporary design in a way that really honors the existing character and works within the framework of the neighborhood. And so that's sort of the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report in a nutshell. I do want to point out that if you're interested in more information on the report, if you want to take a look at a copy of the report itself, read through the entire report, you're welcome to do that. You can go to chicago.gov/Woodlawn. And there's information there. Again, the draft report is there, information and background on it, as well as you can view a lot of plans and studies that went into the development of this report. So with that, I want to hand it over to Anthony Simpkins to talk through what Department of Housing is doing on their affordable housing strategies.
It's nice to be back with the residents and stakeholders in Woodlawn once again. As many of you know, we've spent a lot of time with and listening to the residents of Woodlawn. And, you know, we wanted to acknowledge all of those past plans and studies that included the input from Woodlawn residents about their vision for their neighborhood and their concerns for their community. So in putting together a housing strategy, we wanted to honor that past work of residents, including the network of Woodlawn and their recent study, as well as We Can and the CBA Coalition. There have been a lot of stakeholders that have brought to bear information that guides our housing strategy. So in order to do that, who's in charge of the slides? Can you move to the next one?
I think I'm in charge, so just let me know when you want me to advance.
Okay, yep. Is that the next slide?
That is the next slide.
Yes, that is the next slide. That is the next slide. Okay, I thought there was a list of the stakeholders. So in putting together a strategy, we wanted to focus on housing as was communicated to us by residents of Woodlawn, that housing was an immediate and primary concern, and that it needed to be addressed with some urgency because of concerns about gentrification and displacement with the advent of the Obama Center. So we wanted to do that, keeping in mind that our housing strategy was part of an initial step in this comprehensive framework plan and the planning process that Nolan referred to. So in doing that, we convened a working group, a housing working group that represented stakeholders from across the spectrum in Woodlawn, including both homeowners and renters and key institutions, and of course the aldermen as well, members of the CBA Coalition, of the Network of Woodlawn, of We Can, homeowners and tenants groups, to get a broad consensus of both the aspirations and the concerns of the residents of Woodlawn. And based upon all of that work and the hard work of the housing working group, we came up with 5 sort of pillars of the housing strategy. The first being to help protect existing residents from displacement. The second focus, goal, a pillar of our housing strategy is to create new rental and for sale housing opportunities that are affordable to a range of incomes in Woodlawn. 3, to ensure that existing housing stock offers good quality housing for Woodlawn residents. 4, to promote housing options to support equitable and inclusive income diversity in Woodlawn. And finally, to support economic development opportunities through our housing strategies in Woodlawn. You can go on and advance that, Nolan, to the next slide. Thank you. So under each of these categories, we've come up with strategies, and these strategies are incorporated in the in the proposed Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance that was published and provided to members of the Woodlawn community, and is still available on the website. So under the rubric of protecting existing residents from displacement, the Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance incorporates 3 strategies. The first is a tenant right of first refusal. This gives renters in apartment buildings that are going to be sold the first right of refusal if the landlord is seeking to sell the building, and thereby allowing them the possibility of partnering with a nonprofit developer and keeping the rents affordable in their building. The second is the preservation of existing affordable rental, or what we call the PAIR program. What this program does is it allows apartment building owners to refinance their apartment buildings with city resources and keep the rents affordable for their tenants. And finally, there's the long-term homeowner repair grant program. This would provide grants to existing long-term homeowners in Woodlawn to do necessary repairs and improvements to their homes, so they don't have to make that choice between, do I pay my property taxes or do I make some repairs and improvements to my home? Can we go to the next slide, please? Great. And continuing with the focus on protecting existing residents and creating a counterbalance to displacement. We also have 2 existing resources that are being deployed in a focused way in Woodlawn under this Housing Preservation Ordinance rubric. The first is the Chicago Community Land Trust. Existing homeowners can opt into the Chicago Community Land Trust to keep their homes affordable for the long term and also lower their property taxes anywhere from 30 to 60%. Allowing them to remain in their homes and in their community. And the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund is a resource for low-income renters. As we know, there's a significant portion of the current residents of Woodlawn that are low income, and the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund offers landlords rental subsidies that they can use to provide apartments to very low-income households. This would allow many of these landlords to continue to provide housing to their current residents. Woodlawn is a target community for both of these institutions, and they have specialized programs specifically for target communities like Woodlawn. Next slide, please. The second goal, focus of the housing strategy in Woodlawn and the Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance would be to create new rental and for sale housing, and new rental and for sale housing that is affordable for a range of incomes, from very low incomes to middle income homeowners, to maintain income diversity in Woodlawn. So we have the Renew Woodlawn program, which would be inaugurated and funded through the Housing Preservation Ordinance, which it's a for sale program that renovates existing 1 and 2 unit properties in Woodlawn and offers them for a sale as affordable homeownership options. The second is city-owned land. As many of you know, there's a lot of vacant land in Woodlawn, and a significant amount of it is owned by the city. This ordinance would mandate that the city would make available for development of both rental and for sale housing across a range of incomes, vacant city-owned land that's zoned for residential use, with a good portion of that set aside specifically for affordable housing. Next slide. The third pillar was to ensure that the existing housing stock offers good quality housing for Woodlawn residents. In that regard, this ordinance and housing strategy also contemplates inaugurating a Woodlawn Housing Loan Fund. This would be a fund that would help improve the housing stock in Woodlawn and create affordable housing by providing a fund to pay for the rehabilitation of vacant residential structures in Woodlawn. Next slide. The fourth goal was to promote housing options to support equitable and inclusive income diversity in Woodlawn. As you know, housing studies over many, many decades have shown the most stable and thriving communities are those communities that have the most racial and economic diversity. And we want to promote diversity of incomes in Woodlawn and make housing resources available to people from a range of incomes. What this slide shows you is the range of incomes for which housing resources are contemplated in the housing strategy and in this proposed housing ordinance. Anywhere from 30% of the area median income, which means if you're talking about a household of 2 people, about $20,000 a year, all the way up to households on the sort of home ownership for sale side of the scale at 120% of the area median income. For that same household of 2, that would be about $85,000 a year. For a household of 4, about $106,000 a year. Next slide. And finally, we want to support economic development opportunities in Woodlawn. And of course, the Department of Planning, as part of its framework plan, will be focused on that in specific. But where there is a nexus between economic development opportunities and housing, we want to make sure that we're leveraging those. So the proposed ordinance requires enhanced local hiring for residential developments that are developed on city land in Woodlawn, and an open selection process in that regard. And it also provides preferences for development projects that seeks to use city land. It provides a preference for those projects that have local ownership, and the development entities have a local ownership aspect to them. So that is sort of a synopsis of the housing aspects of the plan. Is there an additional slide, Nolan?
Just another
From a housing
reminder,
standpoint?
again, that if folks are interested in information on either of these initiatives, you can go to chicago.gov/Woodlawn. About halfway down the page, there's a link to go to the housing materials, so you can see the draft Woodlawn housing affordable housing preservation ordinance and kind of background and explainers on the different elements of that ordinance. So I do want to, sorry, Anthony, do you have something else to say?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. So before we get to sort of the question and answer, I do want to provide just an update on next steps. Both of these initiatives are sort of taking separate paths, and I want to kind of provide an update on that and also explain why. So the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report is expected to be presented at Chicago Plan Commission for adoption this coming Thursday, May 21st at 10 a.m. If anyone on this webinar is interested in submitting public comment or registering to speak at Plan Commission, you'll need to do so no later than 6 a.m. on Thursday, May 21st. You can email comments to cpc@cityofchicago.org. If you're interested in speaking, you will have to fill out a speaking request form, which is available on the CPC webpage. And again, email that to cpc@cityofchicago.org. The Woodlawn Affordable Housing Preservation Ordinance is anticipated to go to or be introduced at City Council sometime in the near future. My understanding is that date is to be determined. One thing I do want to just sort of underscore here or explain, why these processes or these two initiatives are integrated and are working together, and we're presenting them together, but they're sort of taking separate paths. Plans like the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report, they're really meant to serve as a roadmap, as an advisory document to help sort of guide land use decisions and development objectives in a neighborhood. And plans like this don't go to City Council. They go to Plan Commission, they're adopted, and that is sort of the end of it. That's, it sort of puts the power of the city. It says, we endorse this as an important document, as a roadmap, as a way forward. But then, we continue to work with the community on the implementation of that. The Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance is sort of one of the first things to come out of the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report. It's recommended that it be advanced in the report, and that's sort of the next step. So the Plan Consolidation Report is sort of the foundation, that guiding document that then, future initiatives like this ordinance or zoning overlay district will come out of. And move forward. So I think it's important just to kind of make that distinction. But at this point, I think we're to the point of question and answer. And we do have, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, when people registered for the webinar, they had the opportunity to submit a question. We've collected those questions, we've organized them. If there were questions that were the same, they asked the same thing, or they were very similar. We've gone ahead and combined those just to sort of manage the number of questions we received. But what I'd like to do now is sort of go through these questions. I'll read them off, and then I can either call on people, or the relevant panelist is welcome to sort of unmute themselves and answer the question, and then we'll go to the next one. So, and then once we get through these, we'll go to open Q&A that I know is still being compiled as we speak. So, so the first question that's really sort of the times right now is, how has COVID-19 impacted the city's efforts in Woodlawn? And what sorts of resources might be available for Woodlawn to address the crisis? And remember to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to try that. The Woodlawn Consolidated Plan, it's just that. It's the consolidation of decades of work that have gone to try to identify some long-term kind of systemic issues that involve how do you, incentivize private investment, a lot of quality of life issues, affordability, economic vitality, just goes on. It wasn't designed as a coronavirus mitigation tool. We have other resources to deal with the near term, and the city has been rolling those out to address things kind of at the local scale. And those resources have been circulated by the aldermen and the city to make sure that some of the immediate needs are addressed. But this is a roadmap. The consolidated plan is meant to be a roadmap for the long-term sustainability and evolution of Woodlawn. And I really think that the focus, that is the correct focus, and that's what we've been hearing. I think that's it for me.
Nolan, thanks, Commissioner. I would also add that we have established several resources that are available citywide that are also, of course, apply in Woodlawn. So for instance, we established housing assistance grants to people who have experienced a COVID-related income loss. Where we expect to do another round of those, we hope, very soon. And we hope that another program will be approved by City Council tomorrow, which will allow us to provide grants to affordable housing providers to shore up our existing affordable housing. So those are examples of resources, and that is specific to affordable housing providers who have lost rental income due to COVID. And so those are examples of some citywide efforts that will certainly be of benefit to both people and properties in Woodlawn.
Great. So the next several questions are housing related questions. So Commissioner Cox, you can sit back and relax maybe a little bit. The first one is a two-part question, but related. What income range, and I think Anthony may have touched on this in his presentation, but what income range does the city consider to be affordable? Are middle-class homeowners and renters supported in the Woodlawn Affordable Housing Preservation Ordinance?
Sure, I can start on this, and of course, if Anthony wants to jump in, he's welcome to. I would say in terms of what does the city consider affordable, I think it's important to note that affordability is different for every income. There's a general rule of thumb that says no one should be paying more than 30% of their income toward their housing, whether that's their rent or their mortgage. So a rent or a mortgage that is at or less than 30% of someone's income is affordable to them. We know that it is especially challenging to provide affordable housing for people who make very low incomes, because the cost to create that unit and to maintain that unit is so much higher than what 30% of someone's income is if they're at a very low income. And so we put a lot of resources toward trying to reach affordability for the lowest incomes. And Anthony talked about that on the chart that you saw. That's at people making 30% of the area median income or below, which is about $27,000 for a family of 4. We did hear through the course of we had 6 working group meetings in crafting this ordinance, and we heard a range of feedback about this. We heard people who were very concerned that we continue and then shore up the ability to provide for people at the lowest end of the income scale, which do make up about half of current Woodlawn residents. So we heard that concern loud and clear. We also heard from people that there was an interest in building back a strong middle class that Woodlawn has previously had, and that they wanted to ensure that some of our efforts were going toward creating a higher level of homeownership in the community and attracting a range of incomes along those lines. So the properties of the ordinance that Anthony spoke to tried to address that across the board. In addition to what you heard about in the ordinance, we always are producing affordable housing units through things like low-income housing tax credits. And in fact, we did announce in March that we had just approved a low-income housing tax credit development in Woodlawn that would provide affordable housing in the community. So that's above and beyond anything that you saw Anthony speak to.
How will you ensure that property taxes remain affordable for homeowners in Woodlawn?
Yeah, I'll start on this one and Anthony can jump in, but I think it's important to note that property taxes are set by Cook County, not by the city. There are certain county tax incentive programs that will lower a location's taxes for a certain number of years. And that's generally in conjunction with the site's redevelopment if it's been vacant for a long time. I do think that, this administration has been around now for actually just a year tomorrow. It's one of the things on our list to do is to try to figure out if there are additional things that we can do for people in a community that have concerns about rising property taxes. If there are things we can do to ensure particularly people that are longtime homeowners on a fixed income, on a lower income scale of homeownership, if there are things that we can do there to address rising property tax concerns. I will say we see some ability to address those in very different programs. For instance, if we're successful in legalizing additional dwelling units, that can be making a basement unit or an attic unit or a coach house legal could mean a way for an additional source of income for someone who's experiencing rising property taxes as well.
Why isn't the city dedicating more money to the Low Income Housing Trust Fund?
Well, I'm not sure what the questioner would consider an appropriate amount. The way that this has worked to date, so the Low Income Housing Trust Fund, Anthony mentioned this, provides subsidies specifically for households making 30% of the area median income and below. It's a really important resource for us because that is our most high need population. It also makes up the biggest proportion of our low income renters, are those that are at the lowest end of the income scale. Right now, the way it's funded is that half of the fees that are made from when a developer pays fees to in conjunction with the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, half of those fees go to the Low Income Housing Trust Fund, in addition to fees that they accrue from the state. I will note that in 2020, we were able to secure an additional $5 million on top of those funds to go to the trust fund, which will allow us to provide up to around 500 additional units. And I do want to note that Woodlawn is one of the target communities for those 500 units because we've been interested in increasing our presence in places where we have seen or are concerned about rising property values and concerns about displacement.
Great. How is displacement explicitly being addressed in these efforts?
Well, I think, and I'll ask Anthony. Anthony spoke about this in explicitly in his remarks, but I'll just ask him, I guess, to emphasize that again.
Absolutely. Obviously, you know, displacement was a primary concern for members of the working group. And so when we worked with them to put together and propose this strategy, one of the primary goals of that was, in fact, to address this issue of displacement. And we do that in a number of ways in the ordinance, which we talked about in the presentation. But one of those is this ordinance would include what's called a tenant right of first refusal. So to the extent that there's concern that apartment buildings owners may want to sell their apartments, this is one in the toolbox of resources that will allow tenants to come together, form a tenant association, maybe the association on its own or in partnership with like a nonprofit developer, offer to purchase the building and keep it affordable. So that would be in the ordinance. It would require some waiting periods and some other stuff. So that's one resource to help low-income renters stay in their homes. It deploys it creates Woodlawn as a target community for the low-income housing trust fund, which the commissioner just talked about, which provides rental subsidies for landlords to provide housing to very low-income households at 30% of the area median income or below. It creates a payer program. So perhaps there are apartment building owners renting to low-income residents that really would like to, in fact, stay in the neighborhood and continue to provide quality, affordable housing to their residents. Well, the payer program, the Woodlawn Payer Program, would provide a refinancing mechanism that would allow landlords, in fact, to refinance the debt that's on their property, bring down their debt expenses, and so they could continue to keep their rents low. So there's also, we just talked about, there's a number of housing options for those that are looking to maybe transition from being renters to homeowners, but need an affordable housing option. There also includes some affordable housing options like Renew Woodlawn, and there's a loan fund that allows folks to come in and rehab some of the vacant structures and make them available. So there are a number of strategies contemplated to work together, if you will, to offset concerns about displacement in this proposed ordinance.
Yeah, and I would also add that the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report itself has a recommendation that explicitly addresses making sure that we are addressing displacement by integrating affordable housing strategies into the implementation of the report, as well as any type of land disposition or development that occurs on city-owned land in Woodlawn. The next question is, and I can take this one, what does the report say about greening in Woodlawn, and how will existing parks grow with the community? And so again, there is a recommendation in the report that recommends working with neighbors and area stakeholders and our partners at the Chicago Park District and Neighborspace to identify opportunities for new green space and recreational amenities, particularly in Southwest Woodlawn, which is sort of, the furthest away from a lot of the other recreation amenities. And I think we would also recommend, engaging in a conversation with the Park District around planning for future recreation in Woodlawn and making sure that open space needs and recreation amenities, adapt and evolve as Woodlawn grows and changes. I also, before I get to the next question, I just want to make sure if either of the aldermen have anything that they want to, jump in on. I know, these questions have been, predominantly DPD and DOH answering, but I don't know if either of you have anything you want to add to any of these. Not, I will continue. I just want to make sure that you guys have a chance. And this one may go to Commissioner Cox. Can you talk about the importance of density, including the accessory dwelling unit legislation and the need for denser corridors and denser communities?
Sure. No, of course, I think most folks understand that density that is strategically interwoven into our existing communities is absolutely key to creating a market for a lot of the local businesses that we want to see thrive. They need customers. We also know that the more density you have, the lower the costs to provide affordable housing exist. All right, I'm getting a little echo, but and so there are very smart ways to weave density into existing neighborhoods, and I think the additional dwelling unit legislation that City Council will be introduced this week is a case in point. This will legalize having an additional dwelling unit on a property that would allow coach houses, granny flats, basements, attic unit to the existing residential zoning. And I think that it's, you know, this is historically how neighborhoods functioned. It will allow people to stay in their homes and generate additional income and make that neighborhood denser without visibly changing the character of it. So I think that density in this case, if it's done gently, can be an amazing asset to the revitalization of a community like Woodlawn. Yeah.
Will there be opportunities to purchase and rehab vacant buildings or develop vacant land? How will you ensure that longtime residents have an opportunity to do so?
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about the vacant land, of which everyone, I think, who lives in Woodlawn knows that there's a significant supply of publicly owned land that would be strategic for infill housing opportunities. We want to allow those parcels to be purchased by community developers who want to adhere to some of the guidelines that have been established through the plan and be a part of rebuilding that. So those parcels can be bundled to make them available for developers at all scales, community developers who are already on the south side. And so the hope is that when we have a set of guidelines, we can release those properties for infill development of both existing affordable housing developers, emerging developers who are can provide incremental lot by lot additions to the community. I think that's certainly one of the strategies that feel that's already been memorialized in the Housing Preservation Ordinance. So these are going to be tools that are accessible to folks who want to participate in the redevelopment of the community.
Great.
1 second, Nolan, I just wanted to add one thing, which is in addition to those scenarios that Commissioner Cox described, we also, as I mentioned, heard a lot about an interest in increasing home ownership opportunities. And so in that instance, we would be looking not only for residents to be purchasing homes, either rehabbed existing buildings or new construction, but also our interest is high in supporting local developers to be able to do that. So just wanted to emphasize that as well.
So I think this next one is somewhat related to what does an economically inclusive community look like, and how do these efforts support that vision?
I would love to hear the aldermen speak to this issue. I think they know very well what an inclusive community looks like. So I pass the baton to our alderman.
Alderwoman Harrison, you want to go first or you want me to go?
No, I think you should go first because you have a majority of the land in Woodlawn. I just have a portion of it.
So for me, it's respecting the past, but also making sure that we include what we currently have now. I could appreciate and respect us using the plans over the years, but I also want us to have some more conversations. I think one of the conversations that's forgotten, or the things that we forget, is usually when investment happens, you get gentrification, and we're trying to figure out for it not to happen, and not happen as fast as it probably would, since that we're going to get the investment in the Obama Presidential Center. We're going to make decisions that include all of us, which is why I asked to have this call. In a perfect world, we would probably be having more meetings amongst each other, but due to what is happening in the community, we're stuck with Zoom, but also we can't get everybody on Zoom. And so I want to be very careful about making the decisions, but those decisions ultimately have to include you all. This is not anything that myself, the Department of Planning, or Housing can do alone. We need you all. And so ultimately, because I believe in organizing, we will make the decision together. I think we forget that we've had years of disinvestment happen in the community, and now that we have an opportunity to get it right, it's not going to happen overnight. And so it's just a matter of us having those hard conversations. It's a matter of us being transparent and honest with each other. And it's a matter of us just being willing to hash it out.
So I guess it's my turn, and you know, quite frankly, I'm tired of planning. I'm tired of meeting. We've been meeting to meet about meeting. I've been here. We've had meetings every year. We've put stickers on stuff. We've put stars on stuff. We've had meetings late until the night. We are met out. What we haven't had is progress. Let me say that again, what we haven't had. And yes, you are correct that there has not been the investment, but there's the investment now. And this investment is not going to materialize within 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is a 30-year process. So even if we had all the money in the world, it's still not going to get done. But I think looking against the backdrop of the coronavirus, when we start coming out of this, we're going to need those jobs. We're going to need to have things built. And I think this is an opportunity. Alderman Taylor, I recall you saying, and when we were talking about the CBA and talking about displacement, you kept saying, this is an emergency. People are being put out every day. And I took you at your word. And I said, you know, no, we have to get this ordinance in. We've got to do this. And I said, okay, I'm going to stand with you. And I introduced it with you. And now we've been working, we've been meeting. And it's time to move forward. And now you say, well, we need to talk more. We need to do more. That is the problem in our communities, is that we keep talking about it and we're not doing it. And the time passes. And I think that we should continue to meet. I think that we should continue to tweak it. But I think we need to start moving this forward. It has been 3 years already. It has been 3 years since they announced the Obama Presidential Center. And, you know, we are very fortunate because of our proximity that it gives us the opportunity to make the investment in our communities to make sure. I was born in Woodlawn. My parents lived 727 East 60th Street, right across the Fountain of Time. My grandparents lived 6347 South Woodlawn. My aunt lives 6345 South Vernon. My father's Avenue Lounge was at the corner of 64th and then South Parkway. So Woodlawn is my home too. And I want to be a part of bringing it back to the vibrant community that I knew it to be. And so I hope that whether we put together a continuous working group or whatever, but I hope that we will continue to move this forward.
Well, very, very powerfully, powerfully shared. And I too believe that we have the unusual opportunity to create, the beloved community, the community that Alderman Harrison is describing looks a lot like the cross section of those incomes that Anthony showed, where families that were making a household income 20,000 can live on the same block as someone making 100,000, and that you'd have a range of family sizes. You have housing options for all ages. Whether you're a young professional and you want to move back to your neighborhood, you should be able to find an apartment within your income range and be able to go downstairs and go to a restaurant. If you are a senior and you want to age in place, you should be able to have a way to move from the house that has too many stairs to a independent living house just behind your house that you'll now be able to do with the ADU. So for me, it's about housing options. It's about all incomes, all ages, living within this new community, and that we have a plan for how to move that forward. And it's a 30-year plan. It's not a 3-year plan. And so the things that that we see in this consolidated plan, I think will last for decades. And we will continue to have the conversation to tweak and refine as Woodlawn changes and grows over time. So, I mean, that's the kind of community I want to live in. It's the kind of community I historically lived in. And I think we have all of the makings to do that here.
So thank you, guys. So speaking of moving things forward, I want to make sure that we also have time. We've been receiving questions from attendees throughout the webinar. So I want to make sure we have some time to get some of those answered and also be respectful of everyone's time this evening. Lisa, are you prepared? Are you ready to read off some questions for our panelists?
Sure. So the first question we have, are there city funds available, tax incentives or other incentives available to build affordable housing in Woodlawn? That has sort of been answered, but I'll put that over to DOH. Marissa, Anthony?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. As noted, oh, here comes Anthony too. Yeah, as noted, we have low-income housing tax credits, which we use citywide, and as we just did in our round, and we do award those. In this case, specifically in Woodlawn, the Low-Income Housing Trust Fund, we are actually looking specifically for landlords in Woodlawn and other neighborhoods. So if you are a landlord or know of one who would be open to receiving this subsidy so that we can affordably house more people at that income level, let us know, let your alderwoman know. Either way, we're looking to increase the presence there. Et cetera. So many of the things Anthony has talked about this evening, much of our resources we use across the entire city, but there are some instances of things that we are targeting directly to Woodlawn.
Thank you. Would the city consider the ideal of the idea of landmarks and landmarks districts to protect affordable housing and buildings in Woodlawn?
Well, historic districts are generally community driven. Because the property owners are going to have to comply to the guidelines. So the most successful ones have community support. That's one type of tool. I think there are other types of tools like conservation districts which don't have onerous requirements that you have to comply to, but that they still acknowledge that people see value in the historic character of their neighborhood and they want to conserve it. So I think that a study of what assets the Woodlawn has and to see whether there could be a community-driven support for it is something that certainly interests me and I think would be of interest to the preservation community of Chicago as well.
The next question, in reference to commercial corridor recommendation 422, would my small business, which has no physical address, qualify? Many of the small business grants I am ineligible for, even though COVID-19 has impacted my business negatively. So Nolan, would you like to reference what the recommendation 422 is?
I believe that would be the recommendation to, leverage city resources, existing resources to support local businesses. I do not know the answer about businesses that do not have a physical address. That may be, unless one of the other panelists has that information, that might be something that we'll have to get back. We'll have to get an answer to and get back to them.
They could actually give our office a call. We're working with University Co-works to help small businesses with to get those grants and loans.
Thank you, Alderman. How does the plan interact with the Invest Southwest initiative?
So I think that the Invest Southwest corridors were selected with a criteria that they may not have had as many catalytic assets to pull from as Woodlawn does. I mean, Woodlawn's proximity to Jackson Park, the future investment of the Obama Presidential Center, the access to transit, it had so many amenities that we felt that it did not need to be called out specifically as a corridor-driven strategy for Invest Southwest. There are a number of announcements of the first investments that might be transit-oriented or affordable housing are already in the pipeline. And so it stands really alone as probably a leader in what investment in the South Side looks like. And so we decided to give some other corridors, 12 other corridors, an opportunity to shine as well.
Okay, thank you. According to Federal Chairman Powell, the largest population, 40%, that will be affected most harshly by COVID have incomes of less than $40,000. How does the plan adjust to COVID-19 on housing and income disparities? DOH, I think this has been answered, but.
So I don't know that the the housing plan was an animal, and I think this was pointed out before. It's part of this comprehensive plan, so it was not conceived as a plan to address COVID-19 or the effects of the pandemic. It was a long-term strategy for affordable housing and income diversity in housing options for the Woodlawn community. So it was not designed to specifically be a COVID-19 response. And the city has other resources available to assist folks that are facing difficulties or insecurity with regard to their housing as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you. So this question,
Assistance
Commissioner Cox,
grants.
is kind of I'm sorry.
Just to add, Lisa, that the housing assistance grants that we've offered are limited to people making 60% of the area median income and below.
Okay, thank you. With so many vacant lots on 63rd, how does demolishing the Washington Park National Bank building advance density goals? Can't the new development go on a vacant lot instead?
That's an interesting question.
Mhm.
I actually think that, you know, the adaptive reuse of the existing buildings are going to be a key part of the Woodlawn strategy. I think it was, as was articulated by the number of existing buildings that were featured in the PowerPoint presentation. The particular bank project, my understanding is that unfortunately, it has been allowed to deteriorate to a point where it now has to be considered whether it should be demolished or whether economically it could be rehabilitated. And it's ultimately going to come down to what's the most economically feasible strategy. I mean, if the building had been immaculately preserved, I don't even think we would be talking about it. But unfortunately, I think it has gotten so deteriorated that it may be economically unfeasible for the developer to rehab it. And you know, it kind of breaks my heart when I see buildings being allowed to deteriorate to that state, to the point where we have to consider demolition versus rehab. So that's the reality, I think, of that particular project. It's going to boil down to, can a developer afford to do the rehab? And if not, then we may have to consider other options.
Okay. Next question is, will DPD support the affordable housing protections called for by the CBA coalition prior to moving forward with the consolidation plan? Then it states, we cannot support any planning until affordable housing is protected. Otherwise, we will be planning for a new gentrified population. I think this has been answered, but you could reiterate the response.
Commissioner, do you want me to take this, or you want to take this one? Commissioner Navarro.
I guess the question was, will DPD support?
DPD.
Yes.
I'll say this. I'll say this, Commissioner Cox. You know, we had a working group that met multiple times, which included members of the CBA coalition. We had focus groups as well, 5 focus groups that zeroed in on several of the issues that were raised by the CBA coalition, and the requests or the tenets of the ordinance that the CBA coalition advanced. And what we are proposing reflects that input. It also reflects things that were in fact requested by the coalition. For instance, the tenant right of first refusal. The re-emphasis on Renew Woodlawn was not in our original thinking. That grew out of feedback that we had from the CBA coalition on an interest in home ownership for people at lower incomes, given that that is a rehab program rather than new construction, and et cetera. So what we are proposing represents the range of feedback that we got, including feedback from the CBA coalition and from multiple other groups in Woodlawn that had additional goals for the future of the community.
You know, I would just say that these are companion pieces. One is going to determine the urban form of Woodlawn along a host of issues that have been present in people's minds. But it's the affordable housing ordinance that is going to protect the long-term affordability. And if we don't advance these together in close proximity to each other, then we would be remiss. So, you know, one gets approved by the Planning Commission and it's a guide for the long term. The other is approved by the City Council and it becomes law. And you need both of those working simultaneously. It really doesn't matter which comes first. It's just they have to come as companions to each other. And we're poised to have the Plan Commission adopt the consolidated report. And it's my hope that Council is poised to adopt the affordable housing ordinance quickly thereafter.
Okay, this is for DOH. Can we make sure that affordable housing doesn't look architecturally and aesthetically cheap? Can we ensure architectural superiority over new developments and create new landmarks for the future?
Yeah, how about that, Anthony?
I would actually invite Commissioner Cox, and you know, we've had some very robust conversations between the two departments based on Commissioner Cox's background, really trying to, I think, raise the bar on how we combine affordability with stellar design, and the two haven't always gone hand in hand. I think we have lots of examples of where they haven't. So I really appreciate the way that I think Commissioner Cox is bringing some leadership to that issue, and I'd welcome you to jump in on that.
Sure. No, I mean, I think that the Housing and Planning Department are joined at the hip in this pursuit to make sure that affordable housing is actually the most valuable, aesthetically valuable in terms of the quality of life it provides. If you start with affordable housing being the best looking housing, that means you basically have set a pretty high bar for everything. So we fortunately have developers who are understanding it. We're developing a set of principles that will guide development in neighborhoods, and we are going to adopt a set of guidelines to help developers and their architects achieve the excellence that we know is embedded in the idea of quality housing. So we're not just going to leave it to chance. We're going to actually guide the community towards making affordable housing truly the standard for excellence as we develop in neighborhoods across Chicago. Appreciate the question.
Okay. Next question.
No, I should just add that I think that this process in Woodlawn is distinguished as probably the most thoughtful and comprehensive and community engaged planning process for a neighborhood as long as I've been in Chicago. So that as he said, planning and housing joined at the hip. I think this is really an unprecedented approach to addressing the concerns and aspirations of the community and really being proactive in planning the future of a community in Chicago.
Thank you, Anthony. With so many vacant lots on 63rd, no, I'm sorry. This is for DPD. What is the plan to address countless distressed properties in West Woodlawn on roads, Langley, St. Lawrence, Evans, etc.? Too many vacant and blighted homes that could be ideal for homeowners. This is regarding West Woodlawn, Commissioner.
I mean, obviously, I don't know if these properties, if there's a way to have these properties, get them in the hands of people who want to rehab them. But I tend to be a rehab first kind of planner. It's mostly a question of how you get those properties, whether they've gone through some tax sales or foreclosure, so that you can get them in the hands of people who want to rehab them. So if you're talking about existent vacant properties, I think the consolidated plan suggests that we prioritize those rehabs first, and it's pretty explicit in favoring existing buildings first over new construction.
The Troubled Buildings Initiative has worked and would in a case like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have,
Yes, the Troubled Buildings Initiative, Renew Woodlawn, the Woodlawn Loan Fund, all of those would be focused on renovating existing housing in Woodlawn and making it available for people at a range of incomes, both home ownership and rental. So it's in the housing strategy and in the larger neighborhood plan. That's primary.
okay, we have
Go ahead. I
Go
was going to say,
ahead.
Lisa, just to respect
more
everyone's
questions.
time, I think we have
Right.
room for 1 or 2 more questions.
Right, 2 more questions. This one should be quick. DOH, do the percentages referenced regarding AMI refer to gross or net income?
So generally, AMI is measured by gross household income.
Okay, thank you. Last question. In the past, the parks in Woodlawn have not been taken care of. How will this be addressed?
We don't have our Parks District representation here, but I actually think that we need to identify new opportunities for parks. Quite frankly, towards the west end of Woodlawn, we need neighborhood parks that are smaller and that are accessible to young people. They don't have to go to Washington Park or Jackson Park, and with more residents present, you tend to get greater, quite frankly, accountability as those parks have more users. So my hope is that as we see Woodlawn repopulated, that there's going to be a stronger accountability to preserve those parks that we have and to enhance them. But we'll work with the Parks District to try to increase the maintenance and care for the parks that we have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Nolan. I'm turning it back over to you.
Great. So yeah, thank you, Lisa, for doing that. And apologies to anyone whose questions we weren't able to answer in this time. I think we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We've all been on here for an hour and a half. So I want to put up, before I go to sort of the alderman for some closing remarks, I just want to put up where you can get more information if you're interested in reading the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report. If you're interested in reading through the draft Woodlawn Affordable Housing Preservation Ordinance, you can go to chicago.gov/Woodlawn. Both of those documents are there for you to review. There's also background materials. There's information on community outreach that was held around these efforts, as well as those dozen or so past plans and studies that went into the report. If you have any comments or questions, you can certainly email them to us at dpd@cityofchicago.org. So I'm going to leave this slide up, but I want to give both Alderwoman Taylor and Alderman Hairston an opportunity if they want to say any sort of closing remarks before we close this webinar for tonight.
I'd just like to, thank everybody. Thank everybody for coming along with us. And remember that this is a work in progress. I was reading through some of the questions and some of the ones that didn't get answered. So I kind of want to address one of them. Discussion is about Woodlawn. South Shore has a different set of demographics, and we are going to be dealing with South Shore as well. The commitments that I made, I still have. They are coming about in a different way. I think that it's important that we deal with issues of affordability, but at some point, we have to realize that what has proven not to have worked in the past is concentrations of poverty. And that what works is mixed income. And so there is a place for everybody. And I think that's what we want to do. And so I hope that you all, some of the things that were in the coalition, the first right of refusal, that is included in here. So, you know, you are a part of this. And I hope that we continue to work together, but we have to move forward. So I thank you all.
So for me, this is about being displaced. And that's a story I know all too well for myself. Not what I read, not what I heard, but my lived experience. And so I'm interested in doing right by this community. And if that takes time, so be it. I agree. It seems on the South and West sides, we've been planning for years, but a couple of more months of us having the right conversation and doing what's right is okay with me. I'm fine with it. And my community supports me of that in a whole. I want to be able to live in a community or like I used to live when I lived in Bronzeville. And that's not what we called it then, it was called the low end. When I lived there, I didn't care what anybody made. I went to a great neighborhood school that was around the corner. I went to a great church that was around the other corner. And I could walk to 43rd or 47th Street and get anything I needed. I didn't even know downtown existed. But do we get those things back at the price of displacing the very people that we're saying we want to have investment in? And so I don't care what you make. I don't care what color you look like. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And so while I might not agree, the one thing I will say that me and the mayor and Alderwoman Harrison do agree on is that we got to get this right. And how we do that, we got different ways of seeing it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to listen to my community. I'm going to do what's right. And I am willing to stand up and do that in the space that I'm in. And so for me, it's going to take a little more time. I believe we're moving in the right direction. I will respect Commissioner Navarro and Commissioner Cox for coming to the table, for wanting to have these conversations, and for being a part of this dialogue, because it has not been easy. This has been extremely hard. But this is 50 years of this displacement and disinvestment. And so at the end of the day, I thank you all. Please be patient with the process. The process is what it is. But I know what it's like to be pushed out of the community you very love. And I refuse in this seat to do that to anybody else. And so it's worth us doing it right. And it's worth us working together. Thank you.
Well, I don't think we can top those two very eloquent summations of where we are. And so I just thank everyone. We're going to take steps. We're going to take them incrementally. We're going to take them together. I want to be sure that we give people a sense that we are making progress, and that one decision does not stop the conversation. It just propels it forward. And so for those who are interested in the continued conversation, we certainly invite you to listen in, to register to speak this Thursday at the Plan Commission meeting, and to follow closely as the Affordable Housing Ordinance moves forward and to the City Council. This is what progress looks like, and I just thanks everyone for joining the conversation, and thank my fellow commissioners and the staff that put this on, and to the aldermen who co-hosted this evening. And Nolan, I'll let you close it out. But
I think you just did. I mean, again, thank you all for participating tonight, for submitting questions and being engaged. Again, as Commissioner Cox mentioned, the Woodlawn Plan Consolidation Report will be going to Chicago Plan Commission this Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Again, you can go to, let me see if I can get back there real quick. If you want to submit comments, public comment in writing, or register to speak, you're able to do so by emailing cpc@cityofchicago.org. Again, you'll have to fill out a speaking request form if you want to speak live, and submit that to the email address. But again, thank you all for being here. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you, Alderwoman Taylor, Alderman Hairston, for your time and being here this evening. And that's all I've got. So thanks, everyone.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank
Thank you so much. Good
Bye.
night.
Good night.